What is up, everyone? I am Lachlan Samuel, and this is the Open Up Podcast, the show where real people open up and share real stories of struggle. First of all, welcome and thank you so very much for tuning into today's intro episode and the very first of the Open Up Podcast. Today, I'll explain what the show is all about, what kind of content we'll be sharing, who we see this content helping, and why we feel there is a definite need for something like this right now. The coming episodes will largely be based around courageous people who have struggled mentally with things such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, sharing their stories and taking us into their world, into their minds for that dark period in their lives. The stories will be raw and emotional as we hear of experiences ranging from attempted suicide, dealing with grieving the loss of loved ones or a relationship, to things such as self-loathing, self-hate, or even unexplained breakdowns or meltdowns. We see this content, these stories, helping not only these people, these beautiful souls sharing them, but also the listeners out there struggling internally, those lost souls that need guidance and relatability. For our guests sharing these experiences, we see this as a way for them to kind of release the emotional baggage they may be carrying, while also opening themselves up to the support, love, kindness, and guidance of others who are either dealing with or have previously dealt with similar situations. For our listeners, our Open Up community, we see them relating to these stories of hardship and despair, realizing that they're not alone. No matter how isolated they feel, there are others out there struggling with the same situations as well. From these struggles, our aim is for the listeners to take any tips, tools, or tactics our guests describe for overcoming their specific mental adversity and implement them for themselves in the hope that they may find one or more that improves their lives, inching them closer to a life of inner peace and contentedness. The reason we feel there is a need to open up is directly related to the skyrocketing suicide rate. As someone who has been into those dark places myself, I understand how alone and desperate these people feel, but I also know the release and the relief of sharing what you're going through and realizing that when you're open, people generally and genuinely want to help you. Having seen firsthand the impact that opening up has had on the members of our private sharing group, the overarching goal of this podcast is to change the mentality from one where being vulnerable is considered a weakness to one where vulnerability is seen as courageous and unselfish, one where you aren't just applauded but also supported, having opened up, possibly having encouraged someone else to do so as well. Now that we have a little more context, not just about the Open Up podcast, but the Open Up group as well, and who we're aiming to help and how, I feel like it's only right that I, as the host, considering the nature and the emotional depth of the content we'll be sharing, share my story first, opening myself up, becoming vulnerable with you, the Open Up community, the Open Up podcast listeners, kickstarting this podcast in the way it should be, encouraging that courage it takes to actually open up. Now, for this first episode and for my story, I'm going to be reading my blog post that I put out a year ago today. It was the first time I'd ever really opened up to anyone. It's the first time anyone had ever found out about my story and how I got so down that I nearly committed suicide. For me, that was really hard mentally to get over that barrier and put this story out, not just as a blog, but on Facebook, and ask people to share it if they thought it would help someone. The result of me putting this out there was I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. I got support from family, friends, people all over the world who I'd never spoken to before, and the real good thing about this was that people in similar situations were reaching out to me and asking for help, maybe for the first time ever, and that's really what Open Up is all about. It's people being courageous and sharing their stories, encouraging others to share theirs as well. So this blog starts in October of 2015. It all started with the collapse of a pipe dream I'd been chasing. A startup business, something I'd poured my heart, soul, and money into. I'd spent so much time on this business that I forgot to look after myself physically and mentally. I was easily in the worst shape I'd been in for years, and I was no longer the confident or outgoing guy I'd become accustomed to being. With a profound lack of planning, knowledge and judgment, I'd run myself so broke that I had to borrow money to pay my rent, to help my daughter, and to even pay for fuel and food. I often didn't borrow enough money to eat, so when I finally landed a job as an Uber Black driver, I was stealing 10 of the mints meant for my passengers every day. I lived off those 10 mints per day for the next 2 weeks, and to add to this all, my beautiful newborn daughter and her mother had to relocate in a bid for support that, in my mental state, I just could no longer provide. This absolutely crushed me and ultimately culminated in the lowest point of my life to date. Every day for those 2 weeks, I fantasized about ending it. I fantasized about how I would do it and where. I woke up every morning and went to sleep every night thinking about the easy way out. I truly believed there was no longer any point in me being around, that no one would miss me, and that I was only ever going to be a burden on the people I loved. It consumed me to the point that one day, home, alone, in despair, I decided I'd finally had enough. I felt like it was the only choice. I'd completely given up, so I went outside, I took some rope, and I made my way to our garage. As the rope hung from the roof, I readied myself. I stood there, that rope, hugging my neck, and I remember feeling numb. Not 1 ounce of nervousness at all. How can this be? I'm about to end my life. I'm about to kill myself. And not a touch of nervousness. I looked up at that rope and I tugged at it. Yep, it was secure, it was ready, now it was just up to me. I looked down at the ground and took 1 step forward. As I fell, the rope caught my throat. My feet kicked as I squirmed and choked, desperately reaching out for the crate I'd stepped off of in the first place. In those few seconds, I pictured my daughter's little hand holding my pinky. I thought about the cuddles and kisses she'd miss out on, but most of all, I thought about how much it would hurt her, how much it would devastate her to grow up knowing I didn't care enough to stick around for her. I pictured my parents kissing me goodbye as my casket pulled away into the furnace, knowing my mum would cry herself to sleep. It's true what they say, Life really does flash before your eyes. As I scrambled down off the crate, my heart sank and my eyes began to water. I slumped to the ground in absolute shock, shaking, shivering and sobbing while I wondered how I'd become so down and out that I needed to escape by doing this. Over the next year, I worked meticulously on my mindset using mindfulness and meditation until I eventually got to a point where I became so self-aware that I eventually came to understand the reason for my depression, for the despair, for all the hardship I was going through mentally was due to my fear of failure. Having ventured off of this business that I'd hoped to start, I'd only ever seen success in my future, and having so many people on my back telling me I was going to be successful, how amazing this idea was. When it eventually failed, when that success didn't come to fruition, I really didn't understand how to deal with it, and I think that translated to every area throughout my life from that point onward without me even noticing that that was what was happening. If I was asked to dive deeper into this fear of failure and where I think it might have stemmed from, I would have to go back to childhood and growing up as a chubby kid in school, being told my ears were bigger than most people's, that I had buck teeth, that I was a slow runner, and just growing up like that, being so insecure about small things like that. I'd only ever wanted to fit in, and I guess I became my own worst critic, and I started to see all the flaws within myself instead of understanding what I had that was special. Now, when you grow up insecure like this, like I did, whether it was justified or not, you start to do things for the appreciation of others instead of pursuing things you love. And I never really bucked this trend because as I sit here right now and I think about this insecurity, I look back to any time that I had gone on a diet to get in really good shape. I'd only ever done it for the attention of girls, for my friends to tell me that I looked good. Anything I'd done, like pursued a job with a higher wage, this was only because of insecurity, because I wanted to feel like I was doing well, because I wanted it to seem like I was making good money and for people to tell me that I was doing well. I guess with this business, what I was really chasing was
not just success, but success because it would get me the appreciation of the people around me. And now that I think about it, maybe I shouldn't have been chasing that in the first place. That's kind of hard to accept. And to be 100% honest, that's probably the first time I've ever thought about that. Now, that is my story. Like I said, I was going to try and make myself vulnerable, and I think I did achieve that. I opened up in a way I never have with anyone else, and to be honest, I had a realization in looking at my fear of failure and seeing that it is just an insecurity, that I am dependent, or I was dependent on the appreciation of others, and that's something I'm going to go away with now and ponder and work on. So hopefully I can work on weeding that out and, becoming a better version of myself, someone that lives for me and lives for helping people rather than living for the appreciation of others, which, now that I think about it, is quite silly. Now, it's all well and good knowing that I've transitioned over the last couple of years from that despair to semi-contentedness now, but what we need to talk about is how I actually made that happen, and I guess dive deep into one of the techniques that I actually used habitually every day to get my mindset in the proper frame so that I was living every day in the way that I wanted instead of for someone else. Now, the technique. Now, if you do want to read the blog post in its entirety, feel free to do so. I'll link that in the description below. That covers 4 of the techniques I used for mindfulness. But for today, in regards to mindfulness, I want to talk about meditation specifically. This can either be a 10 breath exercise or it can be a 10 to 20 minute exercise, depending on where you are in the practice. Now, if this is your first time ever trying mindfulness, then I would say to go for the 10 breaths first and then work your way up to 10 minutes. Once you do have the 10 breaths down and you can consistently keep your mind on the flow of the air in and out of the body without wandering to another thought, then give 10 minutes a go. Set a timer, set your alarm, and just go for that 10 minutes. Once you hit 10 minutes, then I'd say to increase that time to 20, and then from there you just keep working the 20 minutes a day. Now, for this exercise, I'm going to ask you to sit down either on a chair or on the ground. If you're on the ground, cross your legs, and with your hands you just leave them on your lap. It's very important that you have a nice straight spine, allowing all that energy and air to flow without resistance through the body. So what you want to do for this exercise is breathe in through the nose, and as you're doing that, follow that breath in all the way through the nostrils, down the throat, down the windpipe, past the lungs, and into the belly or the diaphragm. Now, if you can't breathe naturally into the belly or the diaphragm, leave your hand on your belly button, and as you're breathing in, that hand should move outwards. As you're breathing out, concentrating solely on the flow of the air, that belly going in, that hand going in, and that air going up through the diaphragm, past the lungs, up the windpipe, through the throat, and out through the nostrils. Now, all you want to do is repeat this process for 10 breaths if it is your first time. If it isn't, then just repeat this process for 10 minutes. Now, if you are new to this and you haven't done a mindfulness practice or session before, then obviously you may get disheartened because your mind will wander to another thought, something that you aren't supposed to be thinking about, something other than that flow of the air traveling in and out of your body. Having your mind wander like this and really noticing it for the first time can be disheartening when you are trying to progress yourself mentally in this way. But what you've got to realize is that whenever you do find yourself wandering, that is where the learning and the progress is. We have 50,000 plus thoughts a day, and it's only natural that we're going to wander with those thoughts here and there. So in practicing mindfulness, like this 10 breath exercise, 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day, what we're doing every time we bring that thought back from something other than the breath is teaching ourselves that no matter what the thought is, no matter what it is that's got our attention in that moment, that we can bring it back to whatever train of thought we want it to be on. So that means if we're in a heated situation, if we're arguing with a partner, if we're having road rage, if we're feeling insecure, or jealous or resentful, we can acknowledge that our thoughts have wandered to this negative pattern, and we can slowly, gently and calmly bring it back to something that is a little more positive and productive. So that's the mindfulness of breath exercise in a nutshell. Give that one a go, guys, and let me know how you go with it. If it does help you in a certain situation, then I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear about the change that it evoked in you and how you feel you're going to progress with it in the long run. Hopefully it is something you want to take up in the long run. But in wrapping up this episode, guys, if you do want to read that blog post in its entirety and go over the 4 exercises, the 4 tips I have inside that blog post, I will be linking that down below in the show notes, so please feel free to head along to that one. And of course, if you do have a story, or you know someone who has a story that they need to share, that they're not quite comfortable sharing yet, then feel free to get along to our closed Facebook group. It is called Open Up. I will link that in the show notes below as well. And all I'm asking you to do is go through and read the stories, guys. There are plenty of people on there who have come to that page and, open their hearts up to us, open their lives, open their insecurities up to us, and they've got so much support. So if you need encouragement, I would say 100% go there. Or if you just want to share that story, please go there and share it. Otherwise, if you want to reach out to me personally, then I will link all my contacts in the show notes below as well. And to wrap it up, I just want to thank you guys for tuning in. I apologize that my energy, tone, pace and the editing will be a little shoddy for the first, I'd say, 10 episodes, guys, but this is a first for me. I just see this as our way, as the Open Up community of changing lives, and I just want all of you along for the ride. So I hope your day's been amazing and that it just continues to get even better. So just remember, guys, by opening up, we as a group can change the world. Ciao, ciao.